Hello and welcome to the Dinis Guarda YouTube podcast series powered by openbusinesscouncil.org, citiesabc.com and fashionabc.org. I welcome to our series someone that I'm actually quite excited and a good friend and intellectual as well, power mind that I've been actually following for a long time. And as well to start the year, what better than this? I think any new year is a starting point, but it's as well about ideas, about how we can actually change the world and actually looking at solutions for problems that we're solving in business, in technology, and as well as humans. I think humanity has been a species underrated with all the things around AI, around blockchain, and a lot of all these technologies. But first of all, it's about humans and how we interact with each other. So I welcome to our series Mark Mueller-Eberstein. And Mark is actually a personality difficult to put in a box because he's a powerhouse in terms of a lot of different areas. So he's a serial entrepreneur, a strategical leader, a best-selling author, an active angel investor, and international speaker, and with a presence in worldwide events like the World Economic Forum, TEDx talks, and a lot of other events around the world. So Mark has over 20 years of experience in technology leadership positions at Fortune 500 companies, including Hewlett-Packard and Microsoft. And as of now, Mark leads the fast-growing company CodexDF. That is actually a company where he is the co-founder and CEO that develops customer-focused enterprise software solutions to solve complex accounting, reporting, and tax challenges for digital assets, which is quite an interesting point, and you're going to be touching about that. As an entrepreneur, Mark is also the founder of Adgetec Corporation's consulting business since 2010. And this organization mission is to help organizations and their leaders realize value globally. And one thing, of course, we cannot forget, Mark is a global authority and personality around blockchain, compliance, angel investing, cryptocurrencies, and the accounting software, which is actually an interesting thing in the middle of all of these things. And I think we're going to be looking at this. Originally from Germany, Mark received his Master of Business Administration from the University of Technology in Berlin, and also studied at the University of Marburg. And he has continued his academic career ever since, and now as a teacher, and he's been as well leading a lot of things, especially in business education. He's been lecturer in various educational institutions, including Seattle University. And he's also a faculty member of Rutgers University, where he teaches the top 11 USA executive education program and coaches executives on topics related with digital transformation. As a best-selling author, Mark has written multiple books, including the 2010 Wiley published Agility, Competing and Winning in the Tech-Savvy Marketplace. And he has also co-authored No Fear, Business Leadership in the Age of Digital Cowboys, a best-selling manifesto for business leadership in the digital age, published in 14 languages. And I think one curiosity that I want to highlight, that Mark just highlight for us, that Mark is the owner of the only DeLorean car shop in West California. I repeat, a DeLorean shop, which I think particularly right now in the metaverse world with the film of Ready Player One is an interesting one. And I think just to finish, I think just highlighting that what I admire about Mark is his capacity to look at areas as complex as blockchain and digital currencies, but as well bringing it to the business world and explaining it, and then frame these in solutions that actually can help leaders, like all the audience of this podcast, both learning or finding solutions to their problems. And I think we could go through a lot of things, and we're going to put this bio available for everyone listening to this. As you know, we always create a wiki page for each of the authors we interview. But one of the things probably as the last highlight is that Mark is the Global Industry Council Director at the International Federation for Information Processing, established by UNESCO. This is an organization focusing global professional association for people working in information and communication technologies and science. And he's also a member of the Washington State IoT and Blockchain Councils, advising the governor, lieutenant governor, and state legislators, which I think it's key, especially after 2022, which was a very crazy year for the blockchain industry. So welcome to our series, long delayed, but still up and running.
Dinis, it's an absolute pleasure to be and an honor, of course, to be part of this illustrious group. You have interviewed so many impressive people. So I usually try to surround myself with people that are smarter than me. And apparently today and in your group of interviews, I'm at the right spot because there's so much to learn. So I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me.
No, the honor is mine, and I'm very excited. So Mark, you are really a personality, like I said, that you cannot put in any conventional framework, because you keep going through different areas, you keep adapting and you keep changing. And now, of course, you are as well leading a fast-growing company. But before that, let's start by the beginning. So from Germany to Seattle, and a very strong academic education, which I think it's something interesting that I think especially Germany, is that it's quite, I think it's the only country in the world where entrepreneurs are actually the most educated entrepreneurs in the world, probably Germany. So let's start by that background, a bit of your family background, and how do you end up in Seattle after Germany?
Thank you, Dinis. I think you put it quite nicely. It's a really interesting story, I think, that got me to where I am today. And there's an Albert Einstein quote that says, "I do not have special talents. I'm just very, very curious." And it feels like it was written for myself when I read it the first time. So credit to Albert here on this one. Yeah, as you said, I'm born and raised in Germany. Traditional German upbringing. My father worked for state government. My mother is a chemist. So a little bit of science, a little bit of politics, a little bit of economic background. But what really, I think, shaped me very early on was I had the opportunity to see the business world with the Hanover trade shows when I was a child. My father was there, gave me the opportunity to see international trade, international conversations happening. And I was aging myself here, but I was at the very first CeBIT, the computer and office information show that was at that time just a little sideshow with all the big cranes. They had like postal machines and the first computers in one hall. And I was fascinated of what computing technology could do. And I was been involved ever since, from the Commodore 64 as a teenager to the first PCs when I started college. It has been just a passion of mine for all my life. Yeah, as I said, I think growing up in Germany, studied business administration there, did my internships at traditional German companies. I usually said my first internship was at Daimler-Benz in the headquarters of the global car manufacturer, figuring out what spare part pricing strategies worldwide should be, and realized that working in a traditional German company is not the right thing for me. So it's just too regulated. I said, I can't work for somewhere for 10 years before I can order my own pencils. I want to make decisions right away. So the entrepreneurial spirit was there. And I got the opportunity eventually to join Hewlett-Packard. During my master's, I built a marketing company in Germany. Mostly I focused on events. Exited that one in the 90s, then worked for Hewlett-Packard full-time as a product manager, usually say from anything from pocket calculators to Windows NT workstations in the 90s. So the whole gambit. In the German-speaking countries, offered solutions for our enterprise customers since then, and then realized in the 90s, it was interesting, our sales colleagues said, we have trouble, like you might remember Hewlett-Packard had a 90% market share in printers, but we started to not be able to sell as easily to large enterprise customers in Germany. I said, why is that happening? I said, well, they're using this accounting software called SAP, and SAP doesn't print on on Hewlett-Packard print as well. So we started to complain with our American colleagues, and they said, no, we're supporting your fancy A4 formats. We're not supporting any kind of other fancy thing for the Europeans want. So we built local solutions, put them on the price list, made them available in a profitable way that also allowed us to sell thousands of printers. And of course, a couple of years later, SAP became more relevant around the world. I was asked to lead a global enterprise printing solution practice. And that's how I came to the US. First stop was Idaho. That's where Hewlett-Packard's global printer headquarters at that time was. And then Microsoft looked for weird people. So they looked for people just after the consent decree came, said the ideal candidate had an undergraduate in computer science, a law degree, and an MBA. And for whatever reasons, the headhunters found me. They recruited me to Microsoft, and I became part of a team. I would call it the Black Ninja team, or my mother, I would describe it to my mother: if you do not read about Microsoft in the newspaper, I do a good job. So hiding skeletons in closets, doing all kinds of interesting things in the early 2000s. And I've done that for nearly 10 years. And then in 2010, said, okay, I was planning on taking a year off of the corporate world, and started to focus on investments, early stage startup investments. Became a member of the angel community in the Seattle space, and wrote my first book. I think you mentioned it, Agility. Here we go. Does it work? Here we go. Agility. Yeah. Okay, good. It's still available on Amazon. About the impact of technology on business success. It was really interesting. Microsoft had collected 50 organizational data on IT capabilities of 15,000 global organizations, and I mined it together with some universities for insights, and that's what we published then. Usually a little bit early. We talked about cloud computing 5 years before it was really fashionable. I had this deal with my wife and said, okay, if I'm at the end of the year, if our net worth is smaller, I go get a job, but instead it was bigger. So I said, I continue doing what I did for another year. So I've done this for 12 years, investing mostly in all kinds of different things, early stage startups, traditional equities, and real estate mostly. And just met a lot of really smart people on this journey and learning from them and with them. And that's the origin story of why I have this whole basket full of interesting things today.
Wow, fantastic. So let me ask one. So you've been on the German culture and the German workplace, which is quite intense in terms of, like you said, academic, very process driven, and then you shift to the United States, which is much more entrepreneurial, much more as well dynamic and full of shift and going forward and going through a lot of different. I think German, from what I experienced and a lot of friends, is much more stable and much more long-term, whereas US is much more frenetic. And of course, right now we are in another time where we have all this hybridization between different parts. So what would be, from that experience, both academic, both professional, because you mentioned the professional career, but didn't mention as well that in parallel, you build as well an academic career and entrepreneurial. So how did you see these differences of shifting from a paradigm that is the European, German, to the American paradigm, and especially Seattle, which is actually quite unique as well?
Dinis, that's a very interesting question. I thought when I was in Germany, we had a lot of cultural training of how to engage across borders, because Germany has a very export-oriented culture. So it's really being aware of cultural differences, mostly from a business perspective. I think that helped me to be, I would say, more open and more open to see the differences and then see what's happening. But also became relatively clear for me, even while I was there in the 90s, that I'm very entrepreneurial driven. I like difficult challenges and problems and trying to figure out how to solve them, get it started, and then like move on to the next thing. So when I came to the US, a lot of the things that I thought were not very German, I think, the organization, the structure, that I would have said, if you compare it, on the German scale, I'm not a very organized person or functional person. But it's interesting, without changing anything, most of my colleagues here would say, yep, very structured, very well with good project management, making sure prioritizations are done correctly, analyzing problems, structuring problems, and then defining solutions and the path to solutions are things that I've been quite good at, and it helped me a lot over the last 20 years here. It's a different world for sure, and there is definitely some cultural shocks as you are crossing from one world to the other. But I think there's a lot to learn, a lot of things you can build on, and just being flexible and open, I think that really helps. And on the other hand, as you said, like the opportunities you have as an entrepreneur in the United States is so much better than what you could do in Europe. The embracing of entrepreneurs, the willingness to take risks, I think that is just something that is very uniquely US focused.
Yeah, and I think still is around the world one of the most dynamic ecosystems in the world. And I think from especially creativity and innovation, although the world right now is much more complex than ever, especially in terms of geopolitics. So Mark, let's talk about your academic background. So because I know that is quite a substantial achievement you did both as academic and business executive education, which of course with two of the leading global universities, but as well how you have bridged this academic part with the entrepreneurial part, which after your career probably with Microsoft and HP went the directions that we're talking right now.
I think the natural curiosity really plays a big role in there. And I think the scientific method of trying to collect information, deriving hypotheses, verifying or falsifying them is something that is just became naturally, I think, for most of my personal life. When I left Microsoft, after getting my degrees, of course, all in Germany, the US education system, I had never gone through it as a student, but being part of the local community here in the Pacific Northwest opened doors where I got asked to provide guest lectures, for example, at our universities here, working with students, working with master students often, helping them to really bridge the scientific questions with the real world examples. And then I got approached by Rutgers University in the 6, 7, 8 years ago for their MBA program. I said, yeah, we are working closely with some of the leading companies for very focused MBA program. And Mark, you have a broad background on different technologies as well as on structuring leadership and structuring strategy. How can we work together and can involve you in that space? And of course, in the early 2010s, all of these were still in-person classes. So I've spent a lot of time in New York and New Jersey with the MBA students there, working through their problems, working on the curriculum. And then, of course, online started. Coursera offered the online courses, and in the partnership with Rutgers, we were able to take a lot of the material that I have been teaching in person and taking it into the virtual world as a leadership class for digital transformation, understanding key technology trends, what they mean for businesses, and driving this forward. This class is out there, available really for everybody, even to take for free, I think. And we have dozens of new students starting every week. So I'm very excited that this material is out there, that people are able to utilize it, and providing feedback and how it helps them in their own journeys on personal development.
Oh, congratulations. And I know that the courses have been a big success and they continue doing that. So then my next question is, how do you make the bridge between this academic scientific curiosity and research, and now you're entrepreneurial and business angel? So I want to touch this bridge because it's quite important, I think, especially for people listening to us.
Yeah. See, I would say I was very fortunate to be able to drive my curiosity into areas that also helped me with business success. And really, it's a flywheel that elaborates on top of each other. I give you an example. I think one of the examples that got me into the blockchain space was I did, as I said earlier, I did a lot of work on cloud computing. I did the closing keynote for the Chinese Cloud Computing Congress, and I think 2014 in Beijing. And just because I said, that's what I was like to talk about, cloud computing. But then a door opened where people out of the audience offered me the opportunity to use a research institute in Shenzhen. Said, we're building this research institute. We have 40, 50 people, highly educated from around the world. And we are looking for academics that are helping us to define research projects that are helping overall collaboration, communication, and the financial infrastructure systems. Cloud computing might be one of them. I said, yeah, cloud computing might be one of them, but I have learned a lot over the last few years about this blockchain thing, Bitcoin, and I'm really curious how this could be utilized in international trade. So I got this opportunity to use the Shenzhen Research Institute there. I spent a couple of months down and try to figure out how the blockchain technology can help with international trade and commerce, especially the Belt and Road Initiative was really big in China at that point. But interesting enough, by immersing myself into that culture, I got to meet not only the folks from my research institute, but I realized that a lot of the Bitcoin mining, a lot of the development was actually happening during that time in China. I got to meet people that were patient with me and explain to me the potential of what they see in Bitcoin. I got to reconnect with an old friend who was one of the first attorneys for the Ethereum Foundation. So I told him how excited I'm about Bitcoin. He told me how excited he is about Ethereum, and we brought, turned this into investment opportunities, of course, while we are there. So all of these things you learn, you invest, you help, you contribute, you bring people together, and at the end of the day, it helped, I think, to lift all the different areas.
So you discovered blockchain in the early days, and you were part of it. So like you said, from Microsoft, which of course is one of the biggest corporations and successful technology companies in the world, you went to the other extreme of blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and you just mentioned mining and a lot of different things. So this is actually an area that, of course, for you and me is quite reasonable, but a lot of people still have a lot of efforts, like what we saw the last month, especially with everything happening in the crypto world. So how did you shift this prestigious career? And actually, right for the university, there's quite a lot of research as well on blockchain, and there's blockchain and cryptocurrencies, but you've been actually the both. And as well, you've been actually leading this for governments, I mentioned the governor of Seattle, and a lot of other institutions like the World Economic Forum, where you've been as well leading a lot of these different initiatives on this. So can you just mention, how did you find first the blockchain? You just mentioned partly of the story in China, but as well how you became involved, and then how you actually left and look at the different areas. Because even me, I've been always trying to separate blockchain from crypto, because sometimes it's quite tricky. And of course, there's some fantastic things, but a lot of things are really quite challenging. And I want to just provoke you in one direction. I had a conference recently here in the UK with some of the top people in both academia and media. And definitely the level of ignorance around the subject made me feel, oh my God. So I think there's still a lot of things, even for people like us that are completely involved on this, that the rest of the world perceives, especially in the academia and in the business world.
I think we still have a long way to go. You're absolutely right, Dinis. There's a lot of unclarity. And I think going back to your earlier question, it's one thing leads to the other. You're showing up, you're with an open mind, and then things happen. So as I told you about the research project I did in Shenzhen, I talked to people that were working for the People's Bank of China on one side, but on the other hand, other researchers in Hong Kong, and said, well, we are, based on you explaining it well enough of what's happening here and what you have learned, can you help politicians to understand it better? I said, well, I can try. So I got invited to the APEC conference in 2016. So I went to Peru to meet with the government leaders from all around the Pacific areas and try to figure out what this blockchain and crypto could look like. And of course, not only me sharing, but I'm taking a lot of insights out of this. You could see that the representatives of countries like Japan or China or Singapore were quite informed. They asked really interesting questions. And then you had heads of central banks from other Asian Pacific areas that hadn't even heard about the technology yet. So really a big chunk of insights there. And then one thing leads to the other. I've been, like, by trying to help people and explain, said, well, if you can explain it to me, can you help a larger group as well? So I got to speak at a lot of events around the world, including things that are not very well known in the public environment. So I got invited twice to a conference called the FinTech Ideas Festival, organized by the Banking Policy Institute. Both things probably most of the people here have never heard about. The Banking Policy Institute is the lobbying organization for the financial industry in the United States. So those are the people that are working with the politicians and figuring out what regulation should look like. The FinTech Ideas Festival was an event held in 2017 and then again in 2019 for only the CEOs of the largest financial institutions, so the CFOs of Visa and MasterCard, and they could bring one additional person, spending a day and a half together to figuring out what the future of technology could look like. And again, I was invited to facilitate the blockchain conversations. And it was interesting to see in 2017, most of these financial leaders had barely an understanding of what the technology or cryptocurrencies in general could do to their industries or the financial world overall. In 2019, though, I brought one of my portfolio companies over there, Pundix. They're a payment company out of a payment facilitation company out of Singapore. That originally started and realized how can we provide access to people that do not have bank accounts, like Indonesian rice farmers, to the financial system and insurance systems. So I brought their CEO, Zach Chea, here to that particular event, meeting with the CEO of MasterCard and discussing how payments could look like 10, 15 years from now. But interesting enough, between 2017 and 2019, Wells Fargo, for example, had moved from we don't know what blockchain is to we have 850 projects internally that are utilizing the technology already. So huge jumps in just 2 years. And of course, now we are 3-4 years further ahead. A lot of things have shifted, and it's just interesting to be seeing that transformation, sometimes helping, sometimes nudging a little bit, sometimes connecting people and unlocking some of the synergies that are happening in this space.
Oh, that's really fantastic, and I love the way you've been actually cross-border in terms of different areas and as well involved in these different things. And I think it's part of your success and part as well of your strength is that capacity to put people together discussing the challenges, the opportunities that comes out of these technologies. So from the blockchain, and I'm following more or less your trajectory in terms of curriculum, you start being involved more and more in international organizations and as well as a business angel. And then, of course, right now you end up actually creating your own startup, now not investing, but on your own personal project that is CodexDF. So tell us a bit that trajectory, and of course, what is CodexDF for people that never heard about it?
Sure. So the blockchain space, again, has been super fascinating for me. I was a lot of my traditional investor friends here. I'm a member of the Alliance of Angels. That's I would say the premier Seattle or Pacific Northwest group. Bill Gates' father founded it nearly 30 years ago. So the traditional investors came to me and said, what is this blockchain thing about? How to work in this space? The Gary Shapiro, the head of the CES, the Consumer Electronics Show that is happening in Vegas, his team asked me to write a book. I think it came out in 2019. That's the Trust Technology. Here we go. Also on Amazon was the CES book, 2019 must-read book there, to explain what the technology can do. And I'm a little bit ahead of the curve, apparently. So I wrote about DeFi before it was called DeFi and talked about NFTs before NFTs were out there. And try to explain and envision where these directions could look like. So for people that are trying to think not where the markets will be in 3 months, but where the markets and scenarios could be 3 to 5 years out, I think those are the really good interesting conversation for me. So what happened was a lot of my traditional investor friends said, well, can you help me to invest? And I tried to explain to them, buy some Bitcoin, buy some Ethereum, and you're okay. I said, no, we don't really know how to do this. I said, well, there are some really good funds, invest in them. I said, well, we don't trust them, but Mark, we trust you. So I had made a lot of the investment decisions in the crypto space with a very smart friend of mine. His name is Eyal. We did a lot of things. We interviewed people like the MakerDAO people before they even before it was called DeFi. We said, yep, those are real people, did traditional due diligence on them and helped them over the years where we could. So I had my traditional friends and said, okay, take some of my money, run a fund. So we looked at it and said, well, I don't want to commit for 10 years, but 2 years sounds right. So I started a fund in 2019 with traditional capital, we invested it mostly in the token space. And in 21, we returned 5.6 times the capital. So everybody was very happy, said, please, that's a great return, Mark. Do it again. So we looked in 21 intensively and said, well, with all the challenges and opportunities in the DeFi space, this is going to be difficult to do compliantly. I like living in the Pacific Northwest. I like living in the United States. I really look good in black and not good in orange. So I want to make sure everything we do is absolutely above board, super transparent, absolutely compliant. And we had realized that we had done about 850 transactions in those 2 years, that the accounting for those was already difficult. And we knew if we would invest heavily in the DeFi space as we would as a group, we would need to make sure that the accounting would represent this correctly, and it would give us an opportunity to do better trades. So even tax advantages. We said we had missed a couple of transactions by days because the tools weren't perfect, and that cost us nearly $300,000 in taxes we could have saved. Nevertheless, so we said there must be accounting software out there. I looked outside, there's a lot of consumer crypto tech software, nothing really that helps an institutional investor. So I called friends and said, what are you using for your billion-dollar funds? And the answer was, well, we are using Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets or, well, kind of paper napkins, and we're trying to figure out what to do. I said, well, that can't be. There must be something. I went to the crypto finance conference in St. Moritz. That's the, I would say, one of the most exclusive conferences in our space in January of 22, and cross-checked again, said, what are you using? Yeah, there's some software out there. Yes, there's software that claims they're doing this right. But to really understand the data of taking crypto transaction, breaking them into all the different pieces, creating a database that you can then sort and against it. Nobody does that. Mark, if you want to build it, here's a check so I can be on the top of your wait list as the project comes out. So I came back, we raised some money and founded CodexDF, the enterprise accounting compliance software, making sure we have people that are in the digital asset space have a professional tool built from the ground up to be as compliant with financial regulations, requirements as possible. So they have a tool to manage crypto assets professionally. And I think if you look at 22, we have seen why good accounting is absolutely needed and transparency is needed. On one side, you have the institutions like JP Morgan saying, okay, we are using decentralized finance tools like Polygon, Uniswap, and Aave to do bond swaps from Japanese to Singaporean bonds and back and forth. So DeFi technology in the traditional banking system. But again, if you want to start to scale this up, an Excel spreadsheet is probably not good enough. You need real professional software to handle that. And on the other side, you have folks that did not care about any kind of transparency on purpose, like the whole FTX crash. You might find it interesting. I actually went to the FTX event in the Bahamas in April. That's where the Clintons and the Blairs and the Gisela Bündchen and everybody else showed up, and started to have conversations with FTX about accounting. And strangely enough, they were not one of our biggest supporters over the last 6 months. In hindsight, of course, it made it very clear. But transparency was not very high on their goals, for sure. But yes, we do have the companies, the professional organizations that really care about accounting compliance, either for themselves, for the regulators, for their stakeholders. They're very interested in what we're building with CodexDF.
Well, that's impressive, and I think congratulations. First of all, I know that it's not easy to do what you're trying to do, and I think it's key because we can only create, first of all, the maturity of these technologies and these solutions if we create platforms like yours. And at the moment, there's a paradox in terms of all the innovation that comes from blockchain technology, and you mentioned DeFi, decentralized finance for people listening to us, which is still even if you were one of the first ones, and we talk about this multiple times, people still confuse the concepts and all these different terminologies. But one of the things that I want to understand, so how, let's say I'm a company, I want to use CodexDF. So why I should use it? And I think it's really important to go through the practicalities. I know that we can talk about strategy, you and me, for hours, but one of the things is really these practicalities are very important. First of all, one of the things I like to do on this podcast is demystify the problems, because it's very easy to put, and I think that's the biggest challenge as well of our times. And I have a question after that about some of this. The challenge is that people become cynic. In one end, there's this, okay, everyone is a scam, everyone is this, and even people that are within the context, they get very lost. And then, of course, there are people that lost fortunes because they don't know how to do things. And actually, this is, when I say this, is not just entrepreneurs or individuals, it's actually governments and institutions. They don't know how to do it, they don't know how to regulate it, and then they do mistakes that actually create more mistakes. And then entrepreneurs try to do, and they do other mistakes. And then, of course, this allows a lot of other people that, like you said, FTX, that are not so focused on the details, and it creates the mess that we have in some of the occasions. So how can we use it in a more like simple terms, like I said, to explain to our mothers, although probably it's difficult to explain all these different things?
I can try, Dinis. So compliance begins with data. You have to have very detailed data to be able to look at what's really happening under the hood of any organization. And we know this in the financial industries and the corporate publicly traded companies. They need to do their Sarbanes-Oxley filings. All of these things depends on making sure you have the right data, the right auditing tools to be able to trust of what's reported and what's out there. In the crypto world, you do have the actual transactions on the blockchain, and those are visible very often, like on the Ethereum blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, Solana, the transactions are visible. Often, though, you do not have detailed information to turn that initial information into actual insights. Let me give you an example of one of our customers. That if they do in the decentralized finance, it's called a swap through an aggregator. So that is, you want to get the best price to turn one token into another. You use a middleman in between that uses different exchanges, and then you get the best price to turning token A into token B. On your wallet, there's just one transaction. What's actually happening, though, is, let's say you're turning the Aave token into Ethereum on 1inch, that's the aggregator. 1inch takes your Aave and turns it on one exchange into MakerDAO token, then MakerDAO token into Dice, Dice into Tether in a different exchange, and Tether eventually into either ETH, Ethereum tokens on another exchange. So our customer said that step itself was 13 different accounting transactions. Now, if you do one transaction a week or one transaction a month, nobody ever cares. Nobody will ever figure out what's really happening. But if you do hundreds of thousands of transactions, those details matter. Where you pay the fees really matter. What the cost basis is of each of those tokens as they go through this really matters, and you want to be able to report on it. What we do differently, but our approach was really taking that crypto transaction and breaking this into all these different little sub-transactions. Like this one swap becomes 13 different accounting transactions that have full information, including reference prices, dates, fees. All of those things are within the specific transaction record. We call it atomization. Our patents attorney think we have like a dozen innovations in this space, just the way we are approaching it and making it available to our customers. So what does this mean for a customer? A customer has often multiple exchanges, lots of different wallets on different exchanges. So they set this up in the CodexDF. It's a software as a service database. All their accounts and their wallets are in the CodexDF system. We are importing all the transactions. We are breaking them into atomic units, and therefore making them available to run reports against it. Could be a profit loss statement based on US guidelines or based on French guidelines. Our customers decide what the reporting logic is. We provide them the detailed data so they can run the reports in any jurisdiction they really need it.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you for the simplicity. And I think for people listening to us, this is a key element because for everyone in crypto, and especially the transactions start becoming bigger, of course, you need to pay taxes or at least to know that you're doing the things right. And especially if you're an institution, this is massive. And I think right now, of course, we have stable coins, we have all these different things. This becomes a big thing. And for instance, in my case, for instance, sometimes I have to pay my team. If I pay my team, for instance, in Asia, it's easier actually to send in USDT than actually to send actually normal money. So the complexity is going to be going on and on. So I don't want to go more technical, and thank you so much, Mark, for explaining that. So, Mark, in terms of your work, so and I think let's talk in CodexDF. So, what's the trajectory that you have right now in the company? Because I know that you have all different areas, and I want to touch in a lot of different questions. But what's the focus right now for 2023? And I know that is a big success. And how are you scaling this? And I'm sure there will be a lot of solutions because this is not just the accounting software. It will be the entire ecosystem of compliance and this kind of solutions. That's what creates, in the end of the day, you solve a problem for the industry, you create $1 billion business. That's normally the way it goes.
Our focus is our customers. So I think when I said earlier, when we started building CodexDF, we got investments from people that actually want to use the software. So we are onboarding customers that have invested in us and with us first over this year, making sure they get the tool they're expecting and that makes their life easier. Of course, the whole crypto market has shifted a lot over the last 12 months. Companies that had $1 billion under management now have several hundred millions, but they still need accounting software. So we're working with them and making sure that they have the tools to be successful in their environments. For 2022, that means often write-offs, unfortunately, because there were a lot of losses. But making sure that the tool works for them, that's our key focus. And then eventually we'll scale up. But we are not going to, CodexDF is not going to be a tool for the masses. It is really for people that have hundreds of thousands of transactions and need to make sure they have reporting needs and requirements that require a professional solution. Now, having said that, since we started our journey, said, your approach at CodexDF is so unique. You have this technology. It looks like you have all these patents that can be filed. How can the rest of the world benefit from this? I said, well, it's hard to build a business around this. As you might have seen, like even TextBit, the consumer tech software, gives away the tech software for the individuals for free. How good it is, different question, and how useful it is if you have multiple exchanges or DeFi. Not even want to go there, but there's tools out there. And as long as you do best practice, best efforts in 22 and 23, you're probably okay with the financial authorities. But what's the future look like? How do you do this right? How do you do accounting for digital asset correctly? Not only for currencies, but also the NFTs, the smart contracts that are coming, like the NFTs could represent real world assets. I think we're looking 23, 24, 25, you're looking out. And we think our technology approach at CodexDF is very likely the best approach of how to provide detailed data for everybody. So we are looking for 23 for the right partners to make our technology available to everybody. We're looking at open sourcing some of the technology. We are looking at different licensing models. We are looking at partners with foundations for protocols and see how could we make sure that there is a model where a community can take our innovations and make it available for the global environment as well. So we're not only serving hundreds of very, very large customers, but we'll be able to make our technology available to tens of thousands of millions.
Well, it's fantastic. And I think it's mostly this ecosystem that is critical because one of the biggest, I'm a huge apologist and actually defender that the only way to build a solid industry is really through ecosystem and these areas of what you're doing with the CodexDF. And especially compliance is key. We cannot underestimate that. And I think the education around that. So shifting from that, so you're very active with the World Economic Forum. You're very active advising a lot of institutions in blockchain. So how do you cope right now with your hat as CEO and leading a fast-growing company and your hat as an industry thought leader and as well an influencer and the personality?
I think the most important thing is having fantastic people around me that are patient with me and helping to making sure that priorities are taken care of in the appropriate order. And focusing on all the different pieces. Great people working with our customers on the development side, but even just making sure the day-to-day life gets well organized. Davos is one of those interesting things. I have been, during the World Economic Forum, there's, of course, the actual conference, the World Economic Forum conference, but the whole town turns into an exhibition center. Countries are renting buildings and turning it into the Saudi Arabia house, the Ukraine house, the Greek house. Companies like Accenture, Salesforce, Google, Facebook, Meta now, Microsoft build huge pavilions to host their customers and share with them the latest and greatest innovations and have conversations with them. So the leaders of large IT companies say, well, we fly them into a country, they meet 2 people on a trip. In Davos, they meet 42. So huge opportunities to be there. And I had the chance to go 6 years, I think, 6-7 years ago. The first time somebody asked me, do you want to go? I said, well, I'm interested. I'm curious. I'm just trying it out. We hired really good people to help us to get in the right spaces, build alliances. And one of the best advices I got was help out, help others. And I said, well, that comes naturally to me. So let's see what I can do. And I ended up curating events, figuring out who are the right people, suggesting folks, moderating, being on panels. And the more good you do, apparently, the more doors open. So I've been very fortunate to be invited to a variety of events that are happening in the Davos week in January. And I'm just always happy to open the doors for others and connect. Partly portfolio companies, projects we are believing in, and just sometimes it's just great people. So we sponsored nonprofit organizations. Like one year we had Global Dignity that is focusing on educating teenagers, children, and educators around the world of how important respect and dignity is. It's Desmond Tutu is one of the sponsors, Trudeau, Benson, a bunch of people behind there. So we helped them to have a successful engagement in the Davos environment. Last year, we sponsored Earth Uprising. That's Alexander Vilanosovar's organization, young leaders that are thinking we have to change how we protect our world and our environment, making sure that we are responsible stewards of our planet, not only for ourselves, but also for our children.
Yeah, and this is actually the key element right now for anything we're going to do, and I think especially is going to be more important now. So I know that we passed 1 hour, so let me go right now to some broader questions related with your research and the different areas how you approach the theory and the practice. So one of the questions I have, and I think it's a particular important one for me, and I think with you would be the right person to answer that, is that, like we discussed before, we're going through a huge phase of complexification of anything that is about technology and business. And part of your work and mine is precisely demystifying these concepts and finding solutions around these concepts. So one of the challenge is that in one end, these technologies are becoming easier to use. But in the other end, they're creating a lot of disturbance, especially right now with the AI chatbots like the ChatGPT and all these things from the OpenAI. But as well on blockchain, we just mentioned all the disruption about FTX. There's the disruption around even creating ID and look at what has been happening, for instance, with Twitter, what is going to happen. But I think 2023 is going to be probably an interesting and challenging year, because in one end, there are some studies saying, for instance, there's only 350 million people using kind of cryptocurrencies in a kind of a daily day-to-day, people like us, and probably you and me are probably part of the 1% or even less. But the challenge right now is that we might get 800 million people using crypto. That's more or less the studies that we say, independent of all the crypto winter, because this is a lot of solutions. And at the same time, all these kind of areas around the AI are creating, and you are a teacher as well, are creating a huge disruption, even for people like me and you. I think if you use the OpenAI tools, you get completely overwhelmed with what you can get out of there. So how do you see this complexification? And I think sorry, this is a big question, but I have to explain it right. The challenge I'm facing, both with my own teams and as well with speaking with a lot of industry experts, is that like you been advising a lot of governments, and when I speak with governments, first of all, I still have to spend quite significant efforts explaining what is blockchain, how does it works, why it matters, and some governments are still trying to, no, I don't want to believe it, it's bad, and others are embracing it. And then when it comes to AI, so the velocity, there's a complex. The keywords here are complexity, velocity, and then trust, and how to use these things, because this is the challenge that I'm facing, is that the people or become cynic because, okay, it's much easier to say that everything is corrupt, everything is about data, and everything is bad, or then, okay, yeah, why we should use this, or then I really don't understand anything, or then we have companies that are disrupting entire other companies. And for instance, right now we might even have Google being disrupted by their own technologies as well. So how do you see this, and how do you look at this from a perspective? And I know that you're very practical as well, for people listening to us, because I think that's probably the biggest challenge of 2023.
I think it's, yeah, you are completely right, Dinis. It's a huge challenge for 23. It was in 22, and it will be in 24. I think education is one of the cornerstones, ongoing education that will help. Education on all levels. It starts early in school, universities, day-to-day, educating our politicians, our business leaders, continue to have those conversations, taking concerns seriously, making sure we are listening and see what's possible, and then experimenting. I think I'm a member of the IFIP, that's the organization focusing on education for IT professionals. And just this morning, one of my, one of the other members, Robin Reskin, who was in the industry as a journalist forever, used the AI to write a poem for the new year. Another member, and sent it out to us as the council member. Another council member took that poem, gave it to one of his portfolio companies to turn it into an animated video of Robin giving the speech of her AI-generated poem in a video format with animations on the side. And it didn't take a lot of time. I don't think it's online, but it's just such a fantastic experience to see how people actually play with the technology, see what it can do for them, and being amazed. And then you start to imagine what's possible. On the digital currency side, we have done this early enough, like give people install a Bitcoin wallet, like on their phone, and send a little bit of currency back and forth and see how easy it can be. People that have been growing up in China, they have been growing up with the WeChat and Alipay and the QR code scanning for a longer time. So they are more familiar with some of these technologies work than people that have swiped their credit card for all their lives. But it's just picking up people where they are, explaining it to them in their language, and taking concerns very, very seriously. I mean, if somebody raises a concern, it means they actually care. They want to know. So, and if they are open to learning, that's a starting point for a conversation.
Yeah, that's probably the most important thing right now. Is this kind of conversations are really more important than ever. So Mark, we have the World Economic Forum. So for people listening to us in the future, we are in the beginning of January, actually, literally on the 4th of January, or 3rd of January. So really beginning of the year of 2023. So how do you see the World Economic Forum and these organizations to actually tackle these issues? Because I think that right now that's really definitely a big challenge that I know that the United States is calmer, at least with the present administration, at least a bit more calmer. But there's a lot of tackling issues, because you mentioned China, but China is going through a lot of challenging things. There's, of course, all the issues with India that is becoming, by 2050, I think, the second economy in the world. And as well, even the innovation in the United States is not changing the United States. So we're going to see geopolitical massive changes, and technology, the changes will not stop, but actually they're going to be disrupting. And not everything depends on people like us, but at the same time depends as well how we frame these technologies and how we actually use it for our own sake, not the other way around.
Now, I think it's about, again, creating clarity, education, and creating frameworks where people can find themselves and their history and their knowledge and expertise in as well. The World Economic Forum, well, this Sustainable Development Goals, I said I have to put this on, I guess, here, the little thing here. I'll take that to Davos, but it really looks at the world with around key challenges, if it's education, if it's energy, if it's equity, looking at all of these pieces both together, but also as an individual lens, helps to understand the bigger picture and bringing things together and uncovering, I think, synergies between different areas. There's between energy decentralization and blockchain technology. Those could be things. Education, we talked about. New financial access to financial systems brings economic development. I think I mentioned briefly earlier the Indonesian rice farmers that do not have an identity, a bank account, and therefore no opportunity to do crop insurance. Something that is for farmers in the US or in Western Europe, a normal thing to have. So if they have a failed crop, they don't have to starve. In a lot of areas of the world, that's just not possible because the infrastructure is not there to even create those kind of insurance systems. And I think looking at it from all of those different pieces, taking this and bringing them together, I think can help us to build step by step a better future for humanity.
So let's look at the more positive things on the future of humanity. So from the projects you've been involved, and you have a lot, from academic to just mentioned the Indonesia, and of course there's still around 2 billion people in the world or more. Actually, the numbers are. First, I was in Egypt recently and a couple of months ago, and people were saying that there's a couple of millions of people that are not within the system. So, and it's just an example. So there's effectively probably, I don't know, probably 30% to 40% of the world population doesn't even have any kind of ID or probably even financial inclusion. So from the case studies that you've been working on, you've been saving a very big problem that is the compliance and as well the maturity of the accounting around crypto and conventional systems. But there's a lot of other problems that I know you've been working. So what would you do, the things you would highlight from your experience and as well industry belonging and partnerships?
I think it is really, it's about education and building coalitions and understanding what are the common goals of transparency. We need trust. We are trust for systems to function. And traditionally, centralized organizations have created that trust. We think we are getting to the next step where decentralized organization can create a trust infrastructure for people to work together, to collaborate together, to create value together. Going back to what really hammered it home for me was when I thought about human civilization and accounting. I know it doesn't sound intuitive, but somebody explained this quite nicely and said there was the first accounting revolution was writing ledgers of who owns what and who owes what. But the people able to manage that accounting system had to be the head of the country, basically. So pharaohs or kings. But that created the first system of accounting, and it created centralized governments, governance structures. But it was very few that could afford managing this kind of accounting because you had to trust the writer. There was no audit capability for the writer. If the writer changed who owns which kind of land, nobody could control this or can verify it. So you needed to be very trustworthy, few people. Now, that all changed in the 1500s when double entry accounting was invented, because now anybody who could write a ledger, and then you just had to audit it from time to time to see if you can trust the actual books. And that scaled accounting from very few kings to a much broader part of the society. It created merchants, it created our economic system we are living on today. Global trade, all kinds of things are based on double entry accounting. The challenge with double entry accounting, there's a big difference between the time difference between the receipt, the accounting entry, and it's really very hard to audit. You have to get to the actual books and look into it. Now, blockchain technology, public blockchain technology is triple entry accounting. The receipt is the transaction is the receipt and is a ledger entry. All of these things happening at the same time, often within minutes. We don't know what kind of scale of economic growth this will bring. But we didn't know in 1500s either that we would have stock markets and derivative trading and insurance markets, all of those things that came out of the 1500s that we take for granted today. I think we're at the very, very beginning of this next wave. I think instead of a small percentage of the world benefiting from having access to these tools, these economic tools, a larger percentage of the population will have access, and we will see very new and additional economic value systems coming that might be even beneficial for humankind and our planet in general. Things like decentralized energy is one of those things that I'm quite bullish about over the next few years, or decades actually, where we were thinking about how is it worthwhile to produce, store, share energy? How do you create economic systems that are benefiting the participants, being more resourceful, taking renewable energy, solar energies, wind, water. I was stunned to learn that 90% of dams in the United States are not used for hydro, just because hydro energy production, because it's just too far to transfer, cost efficient to transfer the energy. I think a lot of these things will happen over the next decades if we do it right, and if we enable people to be innovators and entrepreneurs and unlock those potential for them.
So I could not, I completely agree, and I could not finish this interview without highlighting your books. And part of what you just said is very critical, especially with the book, The Trust Economy Technology, how blockchain is changing the world with smart contracts, crypto tokens, security tokens, stable coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Dragon Chain, PandaX, Monero, dApps, Hyperledger. So that's the title of the book. So in terms of this book, which I think it's partly what you just said, and I think highlights a lot of these things, and of course what you just said touches a lot of different things. But so we have agility, no fear, the trust technology, and you wrote as well a book about cloud migration before. So from this kind of, especially the trust technology. So like you said, we had the internet, and like Don Scott, talking about another author, mentioned the trust economy, or the blockchain revolution was creating this trust barrier, especially in the internet, which we're still not there, not even close. So tell us a bit about the book, and about as well how you'll go from these parts that you mentioned before in the context of the book, and for people hopefully that can actually buy the book or get it information about it.
So yeah, as I said, so all the books are available on Amazon. Just my last name, Mueller-Eberstein, you can find them there. Writing about technology, it's of course in a world where everything is changing so quickly. It's always interesting. So I can say, but it's like Trust Technology was written in 2019. We're talking about DeFi and NFTs. Of course, a lot of these things have changed. Some things I think a second edition might be a good idea to rewrite a couple of things where we were not so 100% on track. So, but I think envisioning of what's possible and taking the core concepts out of each of those books really helps. I think even when we looked at agility, the impact technology capability adoption had on the success of an organization. We're comparing car manufacturers, for example. We were able to, in hindsight, to predict the success of organizations going to the crisis of 2008, 2010, just by how well their organizations were open to digital transformation, digital capability adoption. Of course, the capabilities have changed over the last 10, 12 years, but we have things like remote work, video conferencing, all of those things that we talked about in the late 2008, 2009 become even more relevant, of course, over the last 2-3 years than they were then, but we already could see the seeds and the impact on business success there. So that's one of the things we do today, is like with leaders for governments, for businesses, helping them to understand what are the key technology trends and how they will impact their core businesses.
Fantastic. You've been very synthetic. I appreciate. So Mark, I could not finish this interview without talking about how do you see the future. So we have metaverse, we have AGI, we touch a bit of that, and of course, blockchain is still in the inception. Let's put it that way. So from all the research and of course practical stuff that are not so practical, because in the end of the day, if you look at what you're doing with CodexDF, it's a massive amount of work and technology to make it work properly. So can you highlight from the books and from the research you've been doing, and as well entrepreneur, where do you see the major trends, especially that are important for you, for your work, for your team and for the research you're doing with the World Economic Forum and a lot of other things and groups that you've been working internationally.
So I think technology, so first of all, technology capabilities will continue to improve. And we always underestimate how long it will take to actually get to the next result and see how long it takes to actually make the transformation happening when we started. And then when we look in hindsight, say, wow, can't believe how much happened in the last 10 years and how many things have changed since then. So technology capabilities and making those available to more people, more organizations will unlock a lot of human potential and maybe even global potential. And it's happening step by step. And I think looking back 10, 15 years, a lot of these pictures become much clearer than they were looking outside. Again, I mentioned in agility, we talked about video conferencing and remote work and collaboration scenarios. All of those things were there in 2008, 2010. Organization had already embraced it, and you could see the direction it was going to go. That we needed a pandemic for everybody to embrace it, well, sad to see, but the technology seeds were there 10, 15 years before that. Distributed organizations, they were there a long time ago. We had, I interviewed for one of my books, a game development studio that said, yeah, we have fantastic project managers that are usually sitting in the Philippines. We have developers that are sitting in the Ukraine and graphical artists that are sitting in the US and in Japan. All of those, bringing them together makes the right games. And they do this for 20 years. So really the seeds are there, but how fast they go and becoming broadly adopted, that is always a question. And partly it depends a lot on leadership. It depends a lot of how open are we to embracing new trends? How open are we to embrace young people living in a world that comes to us? I think you and I mentioned you mentioned the metaverse. I'm looking at the kids that are playing Roblox every day. That's where they meet their friends that they were collaborating in. Interesting. We wrote about some of these things in New Fear when we talked about the digital cowboys, the generation that was coming 10 years ago into the workplace. So they grew up in a world where online collaboration was already much more ingrained to them. And the rest of the world and people with a little bit more gray hair that have to start to catch up there. But that doesn't mean we have to forget all the good lessons we have learned. Things like trust, auditability, making sure we are not forgetting some of those core lessons. I think when you ask me as an investor, even in the crypto space, some of the best lessons I've learned as an angel investor, looking at teams, looking at technology, making sure I fully understand what's happening and not just FOMO, fear of missing out and throwing money at stuff that might went somewhere and then disappeared.
No, fantastic. And I think that's the most important thing right now is how we put all this together, this collaboration. So last question. So from your experience, you've been working in big corporations with startups and with a lot of international consortia of leaders, different parts. So working with these people takes a huge toll, attention, and you have that passion and as well experience of joining people and explaining, but it's quite difficult. And I think it's one of the biggest challenges how people can actually engage on these directions in the right way. So what would be the advice you give to people listening to us? Because I think this kind of dialogue is key for success.
Mm-hmm. I think patience and being able to listen is as important for a teacher as actual subject matter knowledge. If you find people that are willing to learn, I mean, there are people, it's clear, they have their fixed mindset, they're not able to embrace anything else, and they just want to argue. I don't have the patience to waste my time with them, to be blunt. And I would recommend this to everybody else. You know what? Time is too precious to waste it. But if you have people that are genuinely trying to understand, trying to grow, have a growth mindset, engaging, listening to their concerns, taking the concerns seriously, and making sure we are thinking about it and giving them the right arguments, the right information to make up their mind and to continue to grow where we can. And in that process, we often learn a lot about ourselves and the subject matter as well. Said, hey, I haven't thought about it from this angle. And really bringing this together. I think it's dialogue. It's just, it's a lot of dialogue and learning as well as teaching.
Fantastic. Well, I think with this dialogue, I think it's a great way to wrap up. Thank you so much, Mark. I have a lot of more questions, but I think for the first 1 hour now, I want to let you brief a bit. Well, good luck for CodexDF, and I'm sure there will be a lot of different things that we're going to be probably doing around probably in a lot of things actually around the SMEs and business and how they can deal with accounting in the world of cryptocurrencies, which is an important thing as well for people listening to us. Thank you so much, and wish you a fantastic 2023.
Thank you, Dinis. I wish you and all our listeners a fantastic 2023 and future, of course. If you are in Davos in January, reach out to me on Twitter. That's the best way to reach me. And if you just want to have a conversation, that's a good place to start as well. And Dinis, when you're coming to Seattle next time, let me know. We're not only talking about Ready Player One, but I give you a tour in a DeLorean as well.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.